Good afternoon. Welcome to Restart Michigan with KPMG, Automotive Operational and Financial Restructure. My name is Tabitha Mensch, and I am an engagement manager with the Detroit Regional Chamber in Machado. Thank you for joining us for this session. The Chamber launched this series of webinars to help businesses across the state prepare to restart operations and return to work. I would like to thank our guest speakers, KPMG, for volunteering their time to share their expertise. Before we get started, I wanted to make sure that you are all aware that all participants are on mute, but you do have the option to submit questions through the GoToWebinar control panel. Our speakers will try to address as many questions as time will allow. I will now turn the webinar over to Doug Olander from KPMG.
Thank you, Tabitha, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Doug Olander with KPMG, where I populate the Operations Center of Excellence within our strategy practice. That group, the Center of Excellence, is a unique group of industry veterans who bring their deep experience in a focused way to the factory floor, bringing hands-on improvements in quality delivery and cost performance inside manufacturing facilities. And today I have the pleasure of being joined by Mr. Phil Goy and Florian Mattina from our restructuring group. That group has a history and lineage of over 40 years of continuously addressing liquidity, cash, and restructuring issues within the automotive supply base. As we get started today, the three of us would like to thank the Chamber and Machado for asking us to address restarting manufacturing in this post-COVID environment. As we approach the restart of manufacturing in earnest, over the course of the next few weeks or months, we're going to see a new norm established, and we'll probably be in a deeper, richer, more creative learning environment than many of us have ever been in our lives as we create a new normal for manufacturing going forward. Today, we are starting the first of a three-part series that addresses operational and financial restructuring, specifically as it applies to manufacturing in this new normal environment. And today, we'll be discussing liquidity as we entered into the shutdown and as we're emerging from the shutdown, the impacts of that new normal on manufacturing and on how it might impact liquidity. And we'll be talking to you about steps that you may take, some common sense and some maybe not so much, to minimize any negative outcomes of the restart while also potentially taking advantage of opportunities that it may present. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Phil Goy.
Doug, thank you very much. And it certainly is a pleasure to be with everyone this afternoon. I guess this is the new normal, webinars rather than face-to-face meetings. And I'm sure that everybody has had many occasions to attend go-to-meetings and go-to-webinars and use Microsoft Teams and Skype for Business, etc. And we hope that this is informative. We have some slides also that we put together really just for purposes of following, but certainly we truly encourage any questions as we walk through the presentation, and hopefully we'll maybe stimulate some thoughts as people begin to think about, and our governor allows us to restart the manufacturing in the state of Michigan in particular, but certainly around the country as well. These truly are, and I'm almost getting tired of the word unprecedented times, because they're very uncertain times as we begin to restart the automotive manufacturing industry. Several questions come to mind. Certainly, how quickly can operations really ramp up? Is there money available? Where is the money available? Is there liquidity within the particular operation as well as its supply base? How will the labor force respond to the operating and safety requirements? It will certainly look a lot different than it did when they left 6-8 weeks ago from the plants. And certainly there'll be a lot more requirements that will not be necessarily of things that they have always done, but these are new processes, new procedures, new usage of masks, et cetera, that everybody will have to be very, very aware of. What will be the expectations for operating productivity? Everybody will want to get things done quickly. How quickly can they really move forward? How does it have to be a step process, and how will that step process work? And to what extent will financial pressures, and this is really where Florian and I will spend some time here, the financial pressures, both internal and external, and what constraints will that be placed on opportunities for success? Timing will be important, and certainly liquidity is the name of the game. As a financial restructuring professional for more years than I'd like to say, I've definitely seen my share of stressed and distressed situations. In so many cases, the underlying issues rely on the availability of cash or credit. In business terms, generation of free cash flow and the availability of borrowing against your collateral values, which again may well have changed over the periods of when you went into the shutdown to where you are today. Prior to the current COVID environment, automotive manufacturers and suppliers were doing quite well. And the future was pretty bright. The focus was on new launches, production levels that were higher than we've seen in a while, maybe softening a bit, but still very high, electrification, and autonomous vehicles. Now, as we restart, we now have new playbooks and extraordinary costs. Costs that were incurred during the shutdown, and certainly just to keep things going at a minimal level, but also costs that have been required now to provide safe environments for our labor force. It's going to be hard to determine how much has to be paid and how much you do pay, but safety of that labor force is certainly a key factor, and really the key factor to get things started again. There's an old saying, cash is king. Today more than ever, that's very, very true. Liquidity concerns are paramount. For those that were struggling prior to the shutdown, liquidity has all but evaporated. For those companies that were operating well, the strength of the balance sheets and the availability of collateral, primarily accounts receivable and inventory, have been depleted as there have been no sales over this period of time. The key is to what extent, as well as to what payments will be due when. Timing is critical. The creation of liquidity and the cash conservation is critical. And what I'd like to be able to do now is turn it over to Florian, who will walk through some of the key liquidity factors that you see on your screen that deserve your utmost attention. Florian?
Thank you, Phil. So you've probably been hearing this a lot, and as a matter of fact, you just heard it again from Phil. Cash is king. I feel like a bit like a broken record at this time, but we're emphasizing this because it is really that important. When we as restructuring professionals get to a new case, the first thing we look at is current liquidity and the near-term liquidity forecast. And given the current environment, we recommend that every supplier should have a good understanding of liquidity. And when I say liquidity in the auto industry, I mean two things. First, your own liquidity, and second, your supplier's liquidity. So how do you go about that? What are the components of a liquidity analysis in times of the coronavirus, in times of the new normal? We put together this slide here, and I'd like to walk you through it. So point one is, how has the company been funded during the shutdown? You look at your most recent weeks. What have you spent, and how did you spend it? Did you still have inflow? You probably had little to no direct labor and material costs during that time. Did you do any further cost cuts? Are they permanent or only temporary? You probably still paid fixed costs such as rent, interest, salaries. Did you get an SBA loan or any other government assistance during that time? You may have had some inflows due to payment terms with your customers that may or may not be significant, depending on whether you have a borrowing base in place. Where other sources used to fund the business during the shutdown? Where are cash levels at? Did you draw on your revolver? And that kind of goes already to point 2. What does cash and credit availability look like? Do you know where your cash is at today? Do you know your credit availability as of today? With a, as Phil mentioned, with a significant time period of little to no receivables or revenue, the borrowing base, and you have one in place, is most likely down significantly. So your credit availability might not be as high as you think it is. Third point, is any debt coming due soon? When looking at liquidity, you always have to look at debt maturities too. If a line of credit expires, companies may find it difficult to extend or refinance in the current situation. The same applies to covenant compliance. Are you confident that you will make your covenants in Q2? If not, you should reach out to your financial institution sooner rather than later and or develop a plan B. Point 4, how much liquidity is needed to restart in the new normal? And this question really tackles, 2 questions, or can be separated into 2 questions. Do you have enough liquidity for the immediate restart in the next couple of weeks? So do you have enough liquidity to pay for vendors? They might require you to pay down payables. They may require, COD or CID, which means, cash on delivery or cash in advance. Other payments to consider are your direct employees account back. You may have significant one-time costs related to COVID-19 safety protocols and ongoing efficiencies related to the new normal. Doug will talk more about this on the next slides. What do your inflows look like for the next weeks? The OEMs are going to ramp up slowly. Do you have a borrowing base in place, or you do have to wait a month or 2 to actually see those inflows? Second question, do you have enough liquidity to operate under the new normal conditions for the next month? That also will be the focus of that slides. What does the new normal actually look like? What do in and outflows actually look like? So we're going to go to point 5. What are sources of liquidity funding that remain? Have owners management provided any capital equity business during the shutdown? So in point 4, you forecasted your in and outflows. In point 2 and 3, you looked at the current liquidity. So you know where you're at and where you think you're going. But what other liquidity considerations remain, especially if there are liquidity gaps in the forecast? Have owners contributed at all? Are they willing to contribute if there are liquidity gaps? Could you take on new debt or ease borrowing base reserve levels? What are some levers you can pull to preserve liquidity? For example, reduce CapEx, stretch vendors, salary cuts, etc. And then finally, you need to understand, and that's point 6, you need to understand how your suppliers will be funded. What current liquidity challenges exist? What is the risk of running out of liquidity or funds? If you ask yourself the 2 questions that we just talked about of restart and operating in the new normal in point 4, you will inevitably need to take a look at your supply base and get a better understanding of their liquidity. How can you do that? So by asking them exactly the same questions you've been asking yourself just now, so you jump back to point 1 on this slide, go through the items with them and nail that down. It's a somewhat iterative process because the inability to produce or stay afloat directly impacts your ability to get parts, and it may affect your liquidity if you have to support them anyway, pay down more IP, go on CAD or CIA. So be aware of that. So just to summarize this slide, it's essentially assessment and tracking of your own liquidity and liquidity forecast is key. It's not a one-time chore. Update it at least weekly and do budget to actuals to understand your cash flow forecasting and improve it. And ensure good communication with your suppliers and understand their liquidity situation as well. With that, I'll be handing it over to Doug.
Thank you, Florian. Thank you, Phil. We appreciate that background. So, one thing is for sure, as we approach the restart of manufacturing, we're going to be coming into an environment that's different. One of the key aspects of that environment is demand is going to be impacted, and I believe it's generally accepted that demand will be reduced coming out of the shutdown relative to going in. Why? The economic conditions of this country have changed significantly over the last 8 weeks and have become strongly recessionary. Right now, 2021 volumes for North American vehicles are predicted to be down greater than 15% when taken relative to last year. Even greater uncertainty is placed on what the volumes will be over the course of the next 2 to 4 months as this recessionary economy tries to restart and we see what the actual form of the recovery will be. Secondly, consumer confidence has been significantly impacted in every sector of retailing, from durables to consumables. In that consumer confidence, there's still a great deal of fear. There's fear about what will happen if a second wave hits, and there's fear about what's already happened to people as of today, nationwide unemployment has hit 17%. The other part of the demand that will change will be mix changes. Currently, some parts of our industry are actually having reasonably strong sales. The vehicles that are experiencing that, though, are being fueled by fairly heavy incentives or payment deferrals. But going forward, if we think about what the mix will be, the recovery in travel is expected to be very slow and very sluggish, meaning rental car fleets will not be replacing vehicles at the rate that they have been before, so perhaps that part of the volume drops out. On the positive side, the emergence of a high delivery model through the period of the last 6 or 8 weeks has driven extraordinarily high demand of vehicles supporting that model. So as we come out, we can be certain of a couple of things. Demand most likely is going to be lower than it was going in, and the details of what is in demand will be changed. With that said, as these factories restart, the employee health and safety processes and systems that have been in effect in these plants are going to be emphasized like I think none of us have ever seen previously in our career. Most manufacturers understand they have one shot to get it right when they restart with it, and that the consequences of failure are significantly amplified relative to what the consequences of failure may have been previously. I walk through a number of plants, and every plant starts their daily meeting with the safety metric. Some of them do it in earnest, and some of them do it by script. As we move forward, everyone's going to need to do it in earnest because the consequences are no longer an OSHA citation and higher insurance premiums, but it could lead to the collapse of your business by getting it wrong. Inside our industry, this period has been remarkable, however, in the cooperative work that's been done between OEs and Tier 1s in sharing their knowledge base relative to how to safely restart plants. I think the first one that came on my radar screen was from Lear, but just about every major Tier 1 and all of the OEs now have safe return to work playbooks that are published and served as guides so that as we come back into manufacturing, we can keep our workforces safe. And this cooperation has shown just exactly how interconnected we are as an industry, and has been really heartening for this automotive veteran to see the amount of cooperation that takes place. If we look at those playbooks, the kinds of mitigating factors to keep the workforces safe generally fall into a couple of categories. The first is in hygiene, where we're talking about, what are people monitoring people's temperatures coming in, increasing the amount of sanitization that the workforce does, and increasing the amount of cleaning and disinfecting that's going on in the workforce to make sure that people are not exposed to the virus, while also adding additional levels of personal protective equipment, including face coverings, face shields, additional gloves, additional body coverings, again, to keep people safe. And the better of these handbooks defines levels of action in terms of specific conditional triggers that take a threat level to a new level, and then layer in additional mitigating factors around hygiene. The second area where these handbooks give great guidance in terms of how to keep our workforce safe is in the area of distancing. There's a number of creative solutions to keep people apart from one another to prevent the workforce from spreading any infection. They include break and lunch rotation. They include modified shift patterns of operation. They involve modified layout changes, and they, in some cases, involve decoupling of otherwise coupled equipment in order to assure that as our people come back to work in our manufacturing facilities, that they are safe, that they are protected, and that as a business, we can ensure continuity of the supply chain going forward. Let's see here. Sorry about that. You have a manufacturing guy running the controls, and we kept going backwards. So when we consider, though, the safeguards that are being put in place, one of the things that will be a result of those safeguards is we will have a higher cost to manufacture as these are put in place. Companies will experience increased overhead due to higher MRO, just purely buying the PPE, perhaps needing to add staff to administer temperature monitoring and other safety measures, and or just the sheer number of cleaning and disinfectings that are going to need to be done to stay in compliance with the recommendations and requirements of individual company handbooks. We also anticipate there's going to be a reduced production efficiency. A reduction in efficiency for a number of reasons. Could be because we've socially distanced specific operations, which will add additional material handling and potentially slow down processes. It could be because our personal protective equipment put in place to keep our workers safe impairs their vision or dexterity in performing their job, or it could be that in how we've rearranged our shifts to promote lower plant densities, we build in inherent inefficiencies in our manning system that will translate itself into a higher cost position. We also could be seeing an increase in the cost of quality. Should we have to add additional part handling? Should we have to in some way change what have become tried and true process control plans? We have a risk of having cost of quality increase. In addition, plants that have started early have experienced some increase in absenteeism and some number of people opting out as a result of pre-existing conditions. The removal of that experience and consistency in the workforce has in the past naturally led to some higher level of defect generation, thus a higher cost of quality. And finally, there may be some increase in one-time cost. It could be because we need more racks and packaging to support additional movements. It could be that we need additional quality detection devices to counteract any breaks in our control plans. It could be that the extent of a change to a process requires a new PPAP event to take place, but some level of one-time costs should be anticipated as we emerge from this COVID environment. With that said, if we then look at the environment as we approach this restart, as exciting as it is, the industry set up for a fairly bad equation. We can't expect an increase in purchase price from our customers. However, the environment will have us with lower volume and higher manufacturing cost. That math gets really tough and will present significant challenges to each one of the teams in our manufacturing plants in order to navigate our way through this restart. That said, there are a number of things that you might consider doing to mitigate the impact of this restart.
And let me jump in here then, Doug. A couple of things here on the financial side, which again, as Doug indicated, can be very difficult, but also need a heavy focus on, are opportunities for cost reductions, especially in the short term. There'll be a lot of upfront costs, a lot of one-time costs, a lot of items that will not have the ability to have a 60-day terms on, but more often than not, an immediate pay or a very short pay period. But we want to be able to, in the short term, to the extent we can, with other cost reduction efforts in general manufacturing, not the extraordinary costs that we've had to incur because of COVID, somehow be able to cut costs where possible and conserve cash in the short term, certainly to be able to offset, at least partially, some of the additional COVID costs. In the long term, it's going to be more important to actually establish a new stable baseline in terms of an operating model. It will be different than before. The focus before was, basically try to put more and more and more into a smaller footprint. Now we have some requirements in terms of footprint. And to Doug's point, how can we be more creative in making that as efficient as possible and continue to have a baseline that can grow in terms of productivity and not be in a position where we are stifled in terms of that. So I think that's important in terms of the cost reduction. The other side is to do a good and a detailed cash and liquidity forecasting model. It's not good enough just to say, yeah, I think I have enough cash, everything's going to be good. Here's my operating plan. Over the next couple of months, I'll be fine. It's going to be very important to know when the cash is coming in, when the cash will be going out, what type of terms can everybody get. You can stretch terms and do other things, but of course, everybody else is doing the same. So where is the pinch point? Where are the constraints? How can we really focus on making sure we absolutely understand over a period of 5 days, 6 days working, what are the actual timing and the amounts of cash that have to go out, and when will cash be received from your customers? Have to have the ability to have some flexibility to balance, obviously, the production levels, certainly with all the safety that has to be in place, and continue to be a focus where, yes, we need to get products out the door, but again, we really only have one chance to get this right and to continue to get it right, because any misstep really will cause another delay and a very significant disruption in production.
Thanks, Phil. And to follow up on Phil's point about finding a stable baseline operating model, that's going to be extremely important on the manufacturing floor. Where we start is not the equilibrium position that we'll most likely end up in. Oftentimes, we'll start one place and we'll find over time better ways to do things, and it's going to be critical that we focus our manufacturing skills on the areas that can produce the highest payback for us in the shortest period of time so we can find that stable baseline. The use of metrics and data to find the highest leverage opportunities is going to be extremely important, and relying on a continuous improvement process that we came into the shutdown with and amplify coming out of the shutdown will be extremely important in finding that fast and accurately. Secondly, the other area is there needs to be a raising of the bar in the manufacturing environments in driving discipline. Currently, we cannot fail in implementing environmental health and safety procedures as we go forward. As I said earlier, we have one chance to get this right. The discipline of a man walking around with his safety glasses on the top of his head can no longer be accepted. So as we work in the discipline being employed to the safety processes, to the quality processes, to the production processes will be paramount. And unfortunately, in some cases, this will result in a rich get richer kind of scenario where the people with the stronger discipline and processes coming into the shutdown will have a better chance of effectively implementing and finding the new equilibrium coming out of the shutdown. But it also offers a tremendous amount of opportunity for those that maybe didn't have high discipline and high performance going in to use this event to make substantive change in your plants. And it's not really something that's very discretionary because, again, the cost of failure is very, very significant. With that, we'll be ending today's session, but we'll leave some time for questions. We thank you for taking the time to listen, and I would like to highlight that we should now have set the groundwork for the second and third session of this series, which will occur next Monday, where we will discuss liquidity and business transfer with Phil Goy and my colleague Mike Kamsiskis moderating that discussion. And then Wednesday, talk about hands-on restructuring with my colleague Keith Updike leading that discussion. That concludes our remarks, Tabitha. Back to you.
This is Tabitha Mensch again from the Chamber to wrap up today's discussion. If there are no questions, we want to thank you, send a big thank you to the KPMG team. To all participants on this call, thank you for your time today. You will soon receive an email from me with a link to today's discussion in case you want to review any of the information shared. The email will also include today's handout materials. Please visit our website, detroitchamber.com/COVID-19 for the upcoming schedules for Restart Michigan webinars and our teletown halls, as well as more valuable information and data to help your business successfully return to work. Thank you and have a great afternoon.